see how far that gets you. As a good friend of mine who's a multimillionaire lawyer said, Jim, I've made millions of dollars learning how to be nice to people and being humble. Be kind to people. Be kind to people. Kindness works. Learn to be compassionate. Learn to have a sense of humor. Learn to always have a plan B or C or D. And always remember that if plan B does not work out or plan A doesn't work out, there's still more than 20 letters left in the alphabet. Being persistent. What I think is, if you do these things, you will get better. Why do I think this? Why do I believe this? Where am I coming from? Well, back when I practiced law, I probably did a couple of these things pretty well. I had a sense of humor. I laughed a lot back then. And I was probably nice to people for the most part. And that stood me in good stead even as I got into difficulty. But beyond that, I'm not sure how well I did on all these things. I'm not always sure how well prepared I was as I should have been prepared. I'm not sure I tried every case as well as I could have, or did the best that I could. Let me go back to the first one about showing up and being on time. Every trial lawyer knows, if you are in federal court, you had best show up and be on time. If court says it's going to begin at 9 o'clock, that's what it means. It doesn't mean 9:01. You can set your clock or watch by federal court time. I remember when I was an assistant United States attorney trying cases and as a defense lawyer in federal court, we always started on time. Always. No matter whether it was calendar call day or what, or motions or hearings or trials, we stopped on time. We stopped for lunch. We took breaks for 15 minutes, not 16. The judge was back on the bench. We didn't go into his chambers or her chambers and talk and BS with them as to what was going on during the course of a hearing or a trial. That was a no person's land. You did not do that. But there's a more realistic way of looking at this. In state court, as you well know, if you're a trial lawyer, you have to show up, but you don't always have to be on time, which is, I think, one reason the state court is so much slower and not as organized as federal court. Of course, the state people would tell you that federal court has the luxury of not as many cases as they do in state court. Perhaps that's true. Still, the principle is the same. Show up and be on time. Let me give you a more real-world example of how that works. In the early 1990s, from about 1994 to 1997 or so, I waited tables at 42nd Street. If you go to a restaurant tonight in North Carolina or anywhere in the United States, I will bet you if you go about 5 o'clock, which is when the dinner hour starts, you will see walking in from the parking lot one or two people on the wait staff rushing in, making sure they got their clothes well adjusted into the restaurant, because their starting time when they're supposed to clock in is 5 o'clock. Right? Well, perhaps. But think about it this way. The first thing you do when you go into a restaurant as a waitstaff person is you have to see where your section is to wait tables that night. It's true in every restaurant. All tables are kept by numbers. And so you get whatever section you have, and you have to then do some side work or preparatory work to get ready for the meal that you work on. That takes you a short time, or it can take as long as 20 or 30 minutes, depending on what you have to do. Meanwhile, customers are coming into the restaurant. They're seating people at tables, and someone may get to sit in your section. But you can't totally wait on them because you're still doing some side work. So you ask one of your friends if he or she will take the table and get the drinks and things like that for them. They graciously agree to do so. And then, perhaps they don't graciously agree to do so, but they do it anyway, because they may get in the same boat someday. But at some point, you're still working and you're in a panic, because all of a sudden, you may get seated again. So you got two tables, you're still doing side work. So in a moment of desperation, you ask somebody else to take your table for you. And you're so grateful they're going to do that. you say, you can keep the tip. Don't worry about it. If you will just take it. And then you take a sigh of relief. But suppose your goal is to make $100 or a bill that night. And suppose at this first table you lose a $10 tip, because you weren't ready. Well, what happens? That's 10% of your earnings for that night. You lost because you weren't there early. So I probably should change this when I say show up and be on time. Show up early and be on time ahead of schedule. Always be there before the last possible moment. And if that's true in waiting tables, it's true in anything. Let me tell you what it's like in the real world of law. I was also a client as well as a practicing lawyer. And I went to see my lawyers on occasion. Both of whom are good friends of mine. Both of whom are excellent lawyers. One of them in particular, I always had to wait. Maybe not long, maybe 15 minutes. But you know what? No one in this world wants to go see a lawyer, ever. It's like going to a doctor. Nobody wants to go to a doctor either. So nobody wants to go, and they're sitting there and they're nervous and they're anxious and they're having to wait. Waiting is not good. You don't have to be out there within a minute or two, but don't make people wait. You need to show up and be on time for your new clients, for your old clients, for patients, for everybody. You need to do that. You need to show up. And if you do that, how much better off you will be. I suspect a corollary of this, showing up and be on time, is the concept of returning telephone calls. Lawyers hate to return phone calls. I don't know why. It's part of the program, I guess, of becoming a lawyer. But did you know that is the #1 complaint about lawyers to the North Carolina State Bar? The State Bar, as of a couple of years ago, have 2 paralegals whose sole job every day, the sole job, is to take the calls and complaints from the public. And they are always inundated. Now, these complaints don't always go into grievances. Many of them are dismissed. But many of them fall into the category of not returning phone calls or not explaining yourself well to a client, not communicating well with a client. Do that. Call people back. There are a number of firms who have a rule that says before the day is over, before you leave to go home, you have to first return every phone call. That's pretty easy to cheat on, I suspect, just by saying you did it when you didn't. But let me just tell you, you need to return them all. If you do that, you will breathe more easily, your clients will be more at peace with you, and they will like you better. And then if you make a mistake or get behind on something, they will more easily understand that because you've been responsive to them. People really do want you to respond to them. When I finished practicing law, we didn't have email like you do today. We didn't even have voicemail. We were just getting voicemail when I last practiced law. It shows you how long ago it was. But emails, as you well know, have a stamp on it, a time and date stamp. That can hurt you or it can help you. Let it help you. Respond. You don't have to give people long advice. Just send them a 1-sentence letter. I got your note, working on it, be back in touch, or whatever you want to say. Clients love to get an email. Or if you can't do it, have your paralegal do it, or have someone do it. You can do that at night. You can do that early in the morning before everybody comes and the day is start. Respond to those emails. Don't let them back up and pile up. You do this and you will enjoy the practice of law a lot more. People say to me all the time, the practice of law is not as much fun as it once was. It's more of a business now. It's not as much of a profession as it once was. Well, one of the ways to change that, I promise you to change that, is to return phone calls, have your clients more happy with you, not let them be a burden to you, and do the best you can on being in communication with them on an active and regular basis. How do I know that? I was a client, and I was a lawyer who didn't always do that. I can remember so many Saturday mornings I would go into the office. I had a nice desk, nice office, and this is when we had the pink telephone slips, and I'd have them divided into stacks. And these stacks would always have some that were sort of torn about phone calls that I didn't always want to return. And the reason people don't return phone calls is not so much because you're so busy. It is because you either have bad news to tell or you have no news to tell because you haven't done what you said you were going to do. That's the reason people don't return phone calls. If you had to tell somebody, tell them they just won the lottery, you'd call them. You wouldn't have any hesitance in calling and telling people good news. It's the bad news or no news that causes the problem. You need to get over that. You need to get over that. One of my favorite stories about phone slips and not do anything about them is from the television show The Honeymooners with Jackie Gleason and Art Carney many years ago, Ralph and Ed Norton. And Ed is going to play the piano in a contest. And Jackie Gleason is going to train him. So Carney sits down at the piano to play, but he never plays. He dusts the piano off, gets it clean, gets his arms ready, sits down and sort of flexes his hands like this, like this. And Jackie Gleason almost kills him because he never plays. That's like me going into the office on Saturday morning and putting the stacks of phone slips on a table, but never really calling them. It looks neat. It looks great. But nothing happens. Don't do that. Call your clients back today. If there's someone you haven't called in a while, do so. Paralegals, the same way. One of the most time-honored things I get on these seminars are paralegals who oftentimes tell me the lawyers that they work for don't do that very well. So they talk about you. They don't name you. I don't know who you are, so don't worry about that. But they know that you don't do that sometimes as well as you should. Don't let that happen to you. It's so easy to avoid. And if you do, you will breathe more easily and you will enjoy the practice of law so much better. The most difficult thing is to own your mistakes. This is really hard. This is really hard. I can give you several personal examples of when I did it well and when I did not do it at all. When I did it well, let me start out with that because it's nicer and more fun. I was waiting tables one night at 42nd Street Oyster Bar, and this man and his son came to dinner. The man's name is Bud Calvert. He's a lawyer in Wilkesboro. He was a member of the State Bar Council. And his son was about 12 or 13 years old. And they ordered dinner. I had 3 tables. And there was a table next to them which had 4 people, which meant they spent more money. And I got the bills confused or mixed up and gave to the 4 people, Bud's bill, which was lower. They immediately paid the bill and left the restaurant. It's always amazing to me when something like that happens. You run out to the parking lot to look for them. You can't see them anywhere. They are gone. I always thought they were hiding behind a pole or something, but they were gone. So I come back into the restaurant and tell Bud what's happened. And I said, I'm going to give you a ticket for your bill. It's going to look like it's more than it should be. You only pay this lower amount. And he said, I'll take care of the balance at the end of the night, which meant it was going to come out of my tip money for that night. I wasn't going to make any money. I was going to have to pay the balance out of my tip money because the restaurant wasn't going to lose any money. Bud said, no, I don't want to do that. I said, why not? I want to pay the whole bill. And he did. And then he also tipped on the erroneous higher amount. And his young son used the restroom for a moment, and I asked Bud, why did he do that? He said, well, Jim, you made a mistake tonight, but you said so. You told me what the mistake was. And my son is very impressionable. And I wanted him to learn the real lesson that if you make a mistake in life and you say so, sometimes good things will happen. Now, that's sort of a light, simple story. I haven't inflated it. I saw Bud last fall in a program in Wilkesboro and told him I use this about him all the time. And he said, "What do you say?" And I told him what I just said to you. And he said, "That's pretty much the way it happened. It's pretty much the way it happened." One of my questions I want to randomly ask you in this first hour is this. What is a great way to keep some passion back in your life and fun in the practice of law? What is a great way to keep passion and fun in the practice of law? And the answer that there are many answers, but the answer that I want you to know is to be current with talking with your clients, either to return their phone calls or their emails and to communicate regularly with them. And then you don't have any regrets about your clients that way. Now, let me tell you a real life example of the failure to do the right thing and to own mistakes, since I don't want to tell you all just the good stuff. Several years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I was in Charlotte doing a seminar, and there was a lawyer there who works now for Bank of America. He, many years ago, was one of my law partners and a good friend in Charlotte. He comes to my seminar pretty regularly, and he was telling the group, there were about 15 or 20 of us in this room, he said, "You know, when Jim got into trouble, if he had walked down the hall or somewhere like that and told somebody, a law partner or someone, what was going on in his life, it wouldn't have been as bad for him as it was. He might not have gone to prison." And I'm sitting there listening to him talk. I said, "What did you just say?" He said, "If you'd done this, it wouldn't have been as bad." I said, "Oh my God, I wished I had done that." Then I said to him, "But that was never going to happen. I would never have walked down the hall and done that." And I think it's tough for people to own their mistakes when you do not know the consequences of that. If you know the consequences, it's not so tough. It's when you don't know that it is riveting and challenging. One of the great risks that people have, lawyers, paralegals, everybody, is the desire to be perfect. The desire to do really well and never make mistakes. About 2 years ago, the New York Times did an online article about a young college student. She was a freshman at Penn State. She had been waitlisted for Penn State. Her parents both went to Stanford. She was excited to go there, but her mother, when she was in high school, was always keeping up with her schoolwork, how she was doing, what honor classes she was taking, what grades she was making, and nothing less than A was good. Nothing less than A was good. So she gets to school as a freshman. She goes on her dorm suite or floor, and she realizes it's not as easy as she thought it was. And reading, she tells the New York Times in the interview the truth. She says, "You know, I thought everybody was prettier than I was. Their parties I looked to on Instagram were more fun than mine. And people on my hall always got up for 8 o'clock classes and put makeup on. And I just went in my sweats. One of my friends was so tense and concerned about making it as a freshman, she jumped off the roof of a garage and killed herself. This young girl, whose name was Catherine, bought razor blades from a local pharmacy and began cutting her wrist to see how much pain it would cause. She had flunked her first math test. She'd never flunked a course before. She flunked her first math test. She didn't yet realize that it might be, graded on a curve. So she was going to take her life. She wrote letters to everyone telling them goodbye, her parents, her friends. And the only thing that saved her was her roommate found these letters, confronted her, and got her into counseling. Her father had told her once on a trip home that the only reason he was staying alive was that he wanted to see her married to a nice young man. It turned out that Catherine discovered in college that she was gay. So that was not going to work out quite like her father had thought. And she was afraid to let that be known. She wanted to be perfect in their eyes. She wanted to make perfect scores in school. And Penn State often says they have what they call the duck syndrome. I don't know if you know what the duck syndrome is, but it's, if you go and see a lake or a pond, you see ducks or swans swimming above the water, and they look peaceful. Your law firm probably is this. If somebody comes into your office today, everything looks common. People are well dressed and talking on the phone. They're seeing people, and it's quiet, and everything looks peaceful. But underneath all this is chaos. Maybe it's organized chaos, but it's chaos. In the duck syndrome, it's the idea of the feet of the duck swimming furiously, trying to stay afloat. What you want to do in your law practice is reduce the amount of the duck syndrome. That's what you want to do. Catherine graduated from college and is doing well. She did not kill herself. I tell you this story because this is just exactly like new lawyers who join a law firm and they want to become a law partner. That's like making straight A's. And they know that they have got to do the best they can. They know they've got to work extra hours. They know they've got to build more hours. They know they've got to bring in some new clients and new business. And they know they need to do this for a number of years. That's a lot of pressure. And they can't admit mistakes because their competitors, who are also young associates of the firm, may not make any mistakes or admit any mistakes. So if they want to make a partner, they can't admit them. Clients may not like to take that well if you admit mistakes. So they don't admit them. And they're unhappy. Why is it that the Bar Association says that of all the professions in the world, lawyers are those people who are most inclined to suffer from massive depression because of the stress in being a lawyer and practicing law, or in a paralegal, being around that environment? That's pretty tough. I used to say to people all the time that I thought that passion was one of the most important characteristic traits that any lawyer could have. And I told examples and stories of specific cases in which I was involved, where I got involved. I used to tell this about the Jeffrey McDonald case, about going to the crime scene the first time and what I saw and observed there. And because of that, I came back home to Raleigh and worked harder on this case than I'd ever worked before. I would look at photographs of the crime scenes and all the things that I saw or did not see there, and got really overwhelmed with the enormity of the case, and simply became more passionate and wanted to work harder about it. And I think that is still true. I believe that's absolutely true about passion that way. But also, a year or two ago, David Brooks, who is a conservative columnist for the New York Times, wrote a column in which it was titled Lady Gaga and a Life of Passion. And he had interviewed Lady Gaga in New York when she was at an award ceremony getting an award, and he had asked her what she had wanted to do in her life and how she, when she was a child, what she wanted to become. And she did not say she wanted to be a singer or a star or anything like that. She said rather, I always wanted to be someone who people would think of as very brave and full of a great deal of passion. And so David Brooks spends the rest of his column talking about what it is to live a life of passion. And he said, you know, people who are passionate oftentimes are people who perhaps are not the most secure in the world. Maybe they have a degree of insecurity, and they make themselves passionate because they want to put themselves out there and to try. He talked about ministers who preach on Sunday morning who seem so sure of themselves, and yet what they're oftentimes doing by preaching the way they do, they are trying to make themselves more faithful themselves.